Willkommen zurück hier auf der Hauptbühne beim DGNB Jahreskongress. Wir haben es gerade bei dem Einspieler schon gemerkt, dass wir jetzt im Programm switchen. So we'll take the worldwide perspective as part of the DGNB annual congress, and we're pretty happy to have now the first of two keynotes that bring us abroad and look outside the German, the European bubble. So I'm really thankful to have you, Siang, as a speaker here at the DGNB Congress. Let me introduce you a little bit slightly into Professor Siang. He's here now, already at 6 p.m., I guess, in Singapore. He's really one of the front runners in sustainable building worldwide. He started his career as an urban designer with the Urban Redevelopment Authority in Singapore in 1990. Had different other positions. The latest in 2021 is that he was appointed by Singapore University of Technology and Design to be head of Pillar Architecture and Sustainable Design. And what's pretty much notable is that he's also very engaged in NGOs and in this role. And this is where we met for the first time. It's now 6.5 years ago, where we had the honor to welcome Siang at the 10th anniversary of DGNB in Berlin. So in his role of a chairman of the World Green Building Council, the umbrella organization for councils like the DGNB worldwide. Siang, your keynote is entitled Plan B, not Planet B, not business as usual. I'm really looking forward to hear your speech and get the introduction or get your view on all the aspects that we're also dealing with in Germany here for a long time now. So the stage is yours, Siang.
Thank you. Well, very good morning to each and every one of you. First of all, I'd like to thank DGNB for inviting me to this special event to speak to you, particularly from my Asia perspective and certainly also from my global perspective. Those of you who know me, that I was with World Green Building Council for many years, leading to my chairmanship between 2016 and 2018. And we all have been in the same space, helping to fight climate change. But since then, I continuously look forward and look back and ask myself serious questions as to if whether we can actually overcome this global issue. And I have actually reached a point where I'm really quite worried that our original plans are not really working as well as we think. So I've entitled my talk Plan B, not Planet B for sure. And one of the key issues we're going to look at is actually the issue of business as usual. So right. So the things that I'm going to cover include these to quickly look at history and future. I think it's important to look back so that we have a clarity of how we move forward. I'm going to touch on Plan A, best efforts today, and what are some of the impossible challenges. And of course, coming to the main title, Plan B, what are the new challenges and opportunities? And finally, I'll conclude. Those of you who have been following the global temperature anomaly are probably very familiar with this graph. I thought I knew about this pretty well until I actually happened to pull out this graph again and look hard at it. And it's actually quite sobering to note that for centuries, our temperature anomaly is actually within acceptable levels, except, of course, during the world wars. Not surprising. But the real rise in temperature really started after 1960s in the most serious way. And if you can recall, the pattern of global development then is really about urbanization, the rapid urban growth. And interestingly, also around that time in 1970s, we have the first time Sustainable Development The word was coined probably by Barbara Ward. And people did not really pay much attention about it. As global temperature continues to warm, by 1987, I think this is well known now, the Brundtland Report, talking about sustainability, referring to meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, if we take that report seriously back in 1987, I think we would have done more to bring the temperature down, but nothing seems to actually sink in. Of course, 2006, you're familiar with the movie Inconvenient Truth by former US Vice President Al Gore's campaign. And just when we think that it will again send a sobering signal to the world, it did not. It continued to rise. So here we are today after so many COP events and after the gallant effort by World Green Building Council in 2017 to push for net zero, there seems to be no stopping this warming phenomenon. But if you think about it, all this warming happens only within a short span of 60 years. How hard can it be to turn the tide? If we can do so many things within 60 years to see global growth, urbanization, new innovations, can we apply the same intensity, actually reverse the trend? I think this is a worthy question to ask. So let us go deeper to look at progress versus global warming. And if you look at the chart, I think you will agree with me that the world has been growing economically, socially, not always in the right direction, but all this growth resulted in high carbon emissions. And our population continue to show no sign of slowing down. We are going towards 8, maybe 10 billion people in time to come. So this is growth. It has come about with a significant cost to the future. So when we try to apply Plan A, meaning to say that we advocate for green buildings, green technology, solarization, has it really resulted in a slowing down of global warming? I think the reality is not. I think we are not actually bringing the temperature down significantly, maybe a little. So Plan A is about going towards net zero. In 2017, I'm very happy to be part of the World Green Building Council to stare at this problem with seriousness. And if you look at any calculations, any kind of computation at that point in time, clearly we have no choice but to declare that if we were to reach 1.5 degree or even below, we have to have all new buildings operating at net zero carbon by 2030, and all existing buildings must be renovated to operate at net zero carbon by 2050. It looks like a very, very challenging goals, but without these goals, we're not going to be able to achieve the lower temperature. So at just about the same time, the study on carbon emissions has become clearer, and now with greenhouse gas protocol, corporate standard well developed, we know that scope 1, 2, 3 emissions are clearly defined. There's a willingness to tackle scope 1 and 2 emissions. And as we understand today, scope 3 is voluntary and it's very, very difficult to monitor. Now, all this point to the fact that if we want to be able to contain global warming, we have a race to run. Now, is it a race, a competition, or should it be something that is more fundamental, voluntarily? So we now look at some examples to see where we are today. You can get this information by checking up what Apple is doing. And I think it is one of the most progressive companies, continue to set carbon neutrality target by 2030. And it is hoping to bring everything down. But if you look seriously at all its emission, 99%, by the time it's able to mitigate scope 1 and 2, 99% of its emission is probably in scope 3. And 61% in manufacturing, 30% in product use. So how do they plan to do this? They plan to mitigate scope 3 through Apple's Restore Fund. And what is the Apple Restore Fund? Is to encourage global investment to protect and restore critical ecosystems and scale natural carbon removal solutions. The approach also helps address residual emissions businesses that cannot yet avoid or reduce with existing technology. Well, simply put, is that we have to pay for it. So let's look at other examples. These examples, the next two, are really closer to my home in Singapore, as I provide advice to major sectors such as healthcare. And this is done by one of the healthcare group that really takes carbon emissions very seriously to look at how to reduce the emissions. And it's no wonder that scope 3 remains very high at 82%. But what is also quite concerning is actually the impact of carbon taxes. That Singapore is well known to be prepared to raise our carbon tax to a phenomenally high level that is comparable with first world economy. So to take this seriously, companies have to start to set aside not just physical resources, but financial resources to deal with the future. And there seems to be no clear way to mitigate except through carbon credits and carbon taxes. Let me just also show you quickly another example in the tourism sector. And in the tourism sector, again, there are lofty goals set in Singapore that we said that all should reach carbon neutrality by 2030 as a nation and as a sector too. Very high ambition, mission focus, and there's a certain pragmatism to it. It continues to look at mission as a sustainable destination as part of sustainability. And again, scope 3 emission is definitely on the high side and no clear sign of easy solution to take away or remove scope 3 emissions. So let us quickly look at these three examples and ask ourselves, what are the lessons learned? I think it's clear that scope 1 and 2 emission, we are inching closer to net zero. We're not quite there yet, but I think all have made attempts to measure and tackle source. And all have made efforts to do this within reasonable limits. I think companies that take this seriously are prepared to set aside budget and human resource to tackle this very urgent issue. And there are also serious approach to risk assessment to try to understand the risk of doing nothing. So I think this is quite heartening, and I think the kind of drive for net zero has taken root. To be honest, back in 2017, when World Green Building Council rolled out advancing net zero, I think there's a certain air of skepticism as to whether this will be heeded or taken seriously. I think by today, 2024, this message has sunk home. Now, scope 3, it is unsolvable, even with best efforts. Most organizations are facing scope 3 emissions of 60 to 90%. There are attempts to try to tackle low-hanging fruits and be prepared for financial solutions. And most organizations continue to maintain their focus on their mission. Apple continue to roll out what they call sustainable products, and healthcare sector needs to provide more quality healthcare. And in a country like Singapore, Japan, or even China, there are serious aging population issue. So I told the healthcare sector that they cannot ignore the criticality of caring for aging population. Therefore, it is very unlikely that their carbon emissions will reduce. In fact, it will grow, but grow commensurate with the needs of the country. So there are certainly many organizations that right now use this opportunity to build sustainable brand value. Now, moving on to quickly look at what are some of the current status of Plan A. This is not new to you. Those of you who follow IPCC report would have read something like this by Henry Trop, that I quote, "If countries follow their targets agreed upon prior to COP26 are not enough to ensure warming remains under 1.5 degrees Celsius." And the report continued to state that it is likely that warming will exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius in the 21st century. And it says that the greenhouse gas emissions need to be approximately halved from 2019 levels between 2030 and 2035 before approaching net zero emissions by 2050. How do you halve emissions level? I think this is a very, very serious question. And on the right-hand side bottom, just a quick quote from UN Secretary General. I think it is very telling that everyone is very concerned what is happening. Now, I have continued to seek feedback from industry recently. I also spent some time in my free time to look at something else, which is about archaeology. Interestingly enough, when you look at the ancient cities, they are built upon previous cities without removal. And I think this is very telling the attitude of civilizations, isn't it? So we are not actually spared from this approach when approaching the issue of sustainability. We are building sustainability upon the ancient legacies of business as usual. And I think it is no wonder that we really did not do a good job. We did not address the fundamentals. Now, in a post-pandemic world, I think this has become worse because targets are being reset and there are significant cost increases throughout the world because of inflation, labor crunches, and worsening health conditions. And with business as usual looming and cost increases, I think there are enterprises that are starting to ask questions as to how do we actually survive and yet have business, have growth, have welfare. We need to tackle something. What is the something? I suggest that this is the business as usual part that we need to look at. Now, just a few more items about why Plan A is not working. I think the euphoria of COP21 was built on the assumptions that the world will adopt net zero, regardless of cost and affordable solution, but this is clearly not true. And I think there are a lot of assumptions made about sustainability without challenging business as usual. There's no thorough science-based approach. I mean, today is better with the scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. There's some basis to actually look at the performance of businesses. So should we have a plan B? The picture on the right is just a quick glance that I went to India. I saw a wonderful net zero building, but it almost looked like a third world building that has got that is dilapidated, but it's not. It's actually intentionally designed to be a net zero building. But while this is a tiny, tiny drop in the ocean, the rest of the ocean looks like the picture below. We're not slowing down. So it's not going to be a planet B. As much as I like sci-fi movie, I love exploration of Mars, but I'm sorry to say that won't be a planet B. Maybe not in my lifetime. So the only way to look at things is really to look at resetting. So if you go back to this graph that looks at where Plan A was heading, I think the golden opportunity lies in this triangle in the middle between now and 2050. By any guess, if you look at the graph like this, you know that you need heavy intervention right now to bend the trajectory of Plan A into Plan B. I'm not even saying that Plan B will take us to 1.5. I think anything south of 2 will be a very happy solution. And to this end, we need to look at sustainability policies, innovation, and education. I think these are the areas that we have not spent enough time on, in my view. So let me take you through some of the things that I think we can do to reset. Scope 1 emissions is all clear to you. I commend all the green building councils for doing a good job. Today, I think all green buildings owners are willing to invest in greenery, renewable energy, low carbon materials, and even sensors to help improve the performance of buildings. I think this has become a new normal, and this is the excellent work by green building councils. We must not stop or slow down. We should continue to raise the bar and benchmark. I think certification is important, much as I don't like it, but I think it is a necessary thing to do and continue to do well. But it is not the cure. So if you look at the pie chart on the right, where energy consumption of a building is captured, 70.3% of a typical building are not by the design process, not the construction process, not even by the efforts by the developer, but actually by users. So these are untackled. These are business as usual, and we need to find ways to tackle it. So I'm just going to show you a few resetting. This is a new building, so-called reset. How do we design office building, for example? This building is by no means new anymore. It was in Shenzhen. I think it's more than 10 years old, but I think it is a brave new attempt to try to break the paradigm of what the office building should be. It aims to be naturally ventilated for at least 2 out of 4 seasons. But you can't do that unless the building configuration is designed so. Now, the owners that want to have big floor plate that allows a seamless, contiguous floor plate of users will not be able to accept such a solution. But if we are serious about creating plans, creating offices that can use natural resources rather than energy, we have to reset the way we design new buildings. We need to reset old buildings. There are far more old buildings than new buildings today. And I'm sorry to say that even in my architecture profession, we're spending much more time on designing new buildings and ignoring all the brownfield and existing buildings. I think we have reached a point where we need to look seriously at the art and science of repurposing old buildings. And that's one great way to sequester carbon. So Empire State Building, one great example, 96% of existing building material is capped. And I think this is something that involves a review of development policies. I think in Europe, you probably have a better policy in terms of retention and repurposing of existing buildings. But in Asia, because of the population growth, where we continuously see cities going past 10 million mark, old buildings are very easily torn down to make way for new buildings. We need to change that policies now. And I think we need to even think of ways to stop buildings that are less than 30 years old to be torn down and make way for new buildings. So there must be a second life for brown buildings. Next is resetting districts. As a practicing architect, I know that worldwide we have this habit of taking a big piece of land and cut it down to singular building and sell the land to individual developers to maximize profit. There's nothing wrong in itself, except that to have individual parcel of land to be sustainable is far less effective than having a whole district to be sustainable. So it's too slow to green one building at a time. We need to be able to green one district at a time. So to do this, I think there are certainly a lot of benefits. When you have a district that could be properly master planned and properly coordinated, you minimize movement, you allow diverse users to be co-located, and thus reducing carbon emissions and reducing the construction of highways and reducing traffic jams, which is actually one of the biggest contributors of carbon emissions. The next thing I would say about this is actually about challenging the policy of land use. In the past, because of land use policy, we tend to design single-use building. I think that is something that is archaic in today's sustainability challenge, because single-use building has very, very limited flexibility and continue to see wastage of space because they just can't find enough users to use or fill up the space of a singular building. We need to allow developers, owners to have flexible changes that allow the building to be adapted for other users so that more buildings can be maximized and rather than wasted. So this is again another legacy issue that needs to be challenged. Now for scope 2 emissions, I think we are all quite clear about it. Renewable energy or nothing. So the use of roof solar panels is really very well established, and in other parts of the world you have more alternatives like geothermal, like wind energy. I think all those should be exploited. But one key problem is that when urbanization causes cities to become more dense and more high-rise, this actually doesn't work well at all. So we need to think about how to achieve solarization in the proximity of dense cities and achieve more renewable sources. So on the picture on the bottom right is actually an experiment in Singapore, which has been proven to be successful, which is installing solar panel on water reservoirs. And there could be more innovations, even like the solar panel covering the mass rapid transit, which has extensive space that cannot be used. And the other aspect is certainly about working with neighboring countries to create the renewable network that allows this renewable energy to be more efficiently used across different jurisdictions. So we might have to also rethink how we develop cities. The old model of every building for themselves basically resulted in impossibility of renewable energy. So we now need to think about whether there could be a bigger infrastructural move to solarize a city, or even rethink the whole notion of a high-rise, high-density typology. As the Google HQ of a ground scraper, I thought it's a very interesting case study to look at. Now I'll move on to scope 3 emissions, but I will not be spending too much time on this because it is really far more complex than scope 1 and scope 2. But I would just suggest that even for us in the green building sector, we should help to think along what is responsible consumption, what is responsible movement of people, goods and services, and influence those decisions as much as possible. So in my university, because we deal with beyond technologies, beyond buildings, we look at issues of consumptions and especially mindless consumptions. So these habits of mindless consumption in the case of clothing, food, buildings, and vehicles are all interrelated. They are a closed system. And I think we need to urgently look at policies and free market economy that resulted in wastage. So this is not a short topic, and given the short time I have left, I will not go into this deeper. So Plan B really involves a rethinking of sustainability policies, national policies, or business as usual. Let's comb through and ask ourselves, what are the business as usual policies? Innovation is key. Now that I am in the university, I begin to see a treasure trove in many universities. One of the business as usual problem is that there's a disconnect between the academic world and the industry. I think sad to say, in some instances, academic world has become ivory towers, and industry and academic world has a loss of trust for each other. But it's time that we shake hands. It's time that we bring innovations in the academic world meaningfully into industry, and industry need to embrace more innovations. Last but not least, education is paramount. If you and I of this generation cannot achieve bringing global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius, we jolly well spend the time and effort to make sure our next generation continue to take this effort forward. And the only way to do this is extensive education. So I hate to think that some months later I will talk about Plan C, because I don't think we have any more plans to use. COP will continue to see government make commitments, but eventually I think it's up to businesses and citizens to act. So I strongly encourage the GBCs like yours, DGNB, to take the lead to adopt a different kind of approach that's truly sustainable, affordable, and realizable. I like the opening slogan or speech recorded that talks about the ambition of DGNB. I really like to work with you and hope you success. So finally, there's a bit of time at the what we call the backstage for me to engage you. And I like to make this a call to action for Plan B. And those of you who have interest in Plan B, let's do this together. With that, I come to the end of my keynote speech. And thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Siang, for this fantastic talk. And I guess it's so worthwhile for us to hear your perspective and to see that there, for the one hand, we deal with similar topics, but somehow we're also here in Germany, but I guess it seems to be a worldwide challenge that we dive too deep into separate challenges, and then we think about that. I really like your last slide where as sustainable and affordable, at least in German discussions, are always brought against each other. So for the one hand, we always say that it can work together, but of course there are from the market always the voices that say it's not possible. But to bring this realizable as part of this sentence, I guess this is a very, very important thing that you said, because also there are a lot of words that I write with me, but for this new paradigm that I guess we have a lot of those people who really want to do things, but if you need to have the solutions that are implementable.